Hello and welcome to episode 40 of the TRUUMAN Podcast, the podcast designed to create a generation of self-defined men. Today, I'm joined by an international guest, Martin Pelders. Martin, thank you so much for being with me today. How are you?
I'm well, and you, Lewis. Thanks for the invite, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this one. It's going to be going to put a bit of a trigger warning on this episode because
Yeah, you better.
there's there's a bit of a darker subject, but I think a really important subject nonetheless. But
Yeah.
Martin, before we get into all of that thing, I like to start the podcast with my favorite question. In your own words,
Yes.
Martin, what makes you a man?
I think in large part it's that I'm not afraid to deal with my crap. Just to put it simply. Yeah. So realize that I'm not invincible, that I'm not a Superman, that I'm not a superhero, and find those parts of me that are not conducive to being a great person and sort them out. That's it, simple.
Lovely. Great answer. So, Martin, why don't you intro a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do for the listeners?
Great. So, firstly, well, public speaker, activist for male issues. In South Africa, I deal mainly with the fact that there are so many boys that suffer sexual abuse and trauma as children, and no facilities or very few facilities. Sorry, my wife warned me against using extremes. So very few facilities available for boys. I mean, if we look at it in South Africa, we have probably 420 what they call victim empowerment centers for abused girls and women, and we have none essentially, or one available for boys. That's our organization. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean
So
it's
yeah,
it's sort
yeah.
of
Sorry, man. Distraction. I should have switched my phone
that's
off.
okay.
Messed up.
I, yeah, please phones to silent and airplane mode. We
Yeah.
we have a similar sort of vein in the UK. It's obviously a well covered topic for women, but again, men from an abuse point of view, it's sort of a forgotten about. So I guess why is that in your expertise?
Well, it's just the common narrative that's been pushed for the last 60 years. Since the 1960s and 70s. That oh shame, poor women, they suffer so much. I mean, wow, and men are just the worst, eh? So all women are amazing and all men are just abusive, and that's the narrative that's been forced upon society, and it's absolute garbage. In fact, in South Africa, we found, and all the feminists really detest this research, is that more boys are sexually abused in this country every year than girls are, and that in fact the largest proportion of them are sexually abused by female perpetrators. 20% of those are teachers, 41% are women, and 27% of the boys were abused by both male and female, and 32% by men. They're nasty numbers, and I kind of, it's an issue for me because then we start getting into this gender war. Whereas all we need to do is really highlight the plight of broken boys, in my opinion, humble opinion. Um, so to me, it's astounding that we're like free and equal to, or free and open to turning around and saying all men are trash, or all men are toxic, or toxic masculinity, and we use all these little phrases that they've developed over the years, but we're not willing to talk about the boys that are hurt. And the only time that we talk about men is when they grow up dysfunctional because of the trauma that they suffered as children, and because of the fact that nobody talks about it or supports them. And they're older and they use the 5 coping mechanisms that men have been given. Then we want to criminalize them and throw them in jail and call them trash and toxic and all that sort of stuff. And that's just stupid. That's just, to me, it's very childish, actually.
Why is it such an issue for boys in South Africa? Why is it such a common occurrence?
I don't think it's just South Africa. I mean, we're busy looking at opening a branch for my MPO in Kenya, where we find the same issues. Boys are being sexually abused by women, and it's very prevalent. We don't know the numbers in Kenya, but I'm sure from the calls that I'm getting, it's very high. I think part of the plight in South Africa specifically is because boys are raised without fathers. So we have between 62 and 68% fatherlessness in this country. Going back to the colonization, it was a thing. Rip people out from their families and send them 1,000 kilometers away to go and work in the mines. They can't bring their families with, divide families and that sort of stuff. So I think that's kind of just become kind of a real bad sepsis case in this country. So we're working very hard at trying to re-engage men to become good fathers, whether they are present every day in their children's lives or whether they sort of helicopter parenting. But they need to be present. So we're trying to empower them as well. Be present in your children's lives. It's vital.
I'm doing an event here in the UK. This year's theme for International Men's Day is positive male role models, which I think sort of links into what you're saying there about being
Absolutely.
just present and being a role model in general. And I think it really, really is important. Do you encourage men to be role models outside of the family as well? Because not
Oh,
everyone can have a
absolutely.
father figure.
Well, I mean, if we just do like a broad sort of construct on what masculinity is. Sorry, I couldn't think of the word. Definition. That's the one. Get a broad definition of masculinity, and to me, men are masculine, so they're powerful. I like what Jordan Peterson says. He says where they have a propensity to violence, but it's under control. So that's masculinity for me. But we nurture. We're not just men who beat and all that sort of stuff. We nurture. We nurture our patch. We nurture our families. We mentor our patch. We mentor our families. Very important. I think we can see the effects of a lack of positive role models in South Africa. It's crazy. We are. If you look at all our firsts, we have a record in terms of murders. We have the murder capital of the world, rape capital of the world, child abuse capital of the world, human trafficking capital of the world, and this is all just going. I mean, it's not just because of a lack of fatherlessness. It is corruption and all the other stuff that goes with it, and the lack of ability in policing and all that sort of thing. But it starts with fathers. When somebody grows up without a father and he's not taught those boundaries and that respect, and that's the father's job. And they grow up to be vulnerable to taking bribes or to becoming corrupt. They lose their values. For instance, we had riots a year or two ago in this country, and one of the guys said, "Where are the fathers? If your son comes home with a freaking large screen TV, and he says, 'Oh no, I got this,' you're going to go, 'Dude, you haven't got a job. Where did you get the money to buy this?'" A father would have done that. He would have said, "Hey, where did you get? Take it back. Take it back now." And he would have given you a good whooping in the process. And that's what we lack. So it starts there. It's really endemic. Fathers protect their children. If fathers aren't around, they're more vulnerable to child abuse. We know that, to specifically sexual abuse. So again, I mean, it kind of all boils down to that. The fact that fathers need to be present, but not only in their children's lives, in their neighbors' lives as well. So that father needs to be there, watching the neighborhood, going, "Hey, what are you doing to your son? Or what are you doing here? Why are you beating your child in the street? Or why are you doing this? Why are you doing that?" So yeah, masculinity to me is a very wholesome, very beautiful construct that we're trying to destroy through all sorts of nonsense. I mean, the American Psychology Association in 2013 says we need to destroy masculinity at all costs. You know, what are you talking about? What's wrong with being well-mannered, being a gentleman, being well-groomed, being civil, being what is wrong with that? Gee, get real.
Yeah, I think toxic and positive masculinity are sort of scooped into one. You talk about all the positives of masculinity and how they sort of stem from a strong father figure or a strong role model in that space. But when you talk about riots and those sort of things and antisocial behavior and rape and those sort of things, that's not controlling masculine urges, right? It's masculinity
Yes.
is to be like, for me, it feels almost like I think you use the word superpower, right? Which needs to be controlled. Like there's always good and there's always evil, so you've got to choose the right path with your superpower rather than using it for evil.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess you guys are experiencing that firsthand up in the UK right now.
Yeah, it's clear to see
Yeah.
what's happening, and I mean, it's not a pretty sight at all. It's not what we I want to see. It's not what we want to see as a society. It's almost a collapse of this, and I want to sort of touch on this. It's you touched on it a bit. It's almost generational. We're sort of men. I'm in my early 30s now, and there's obviously a few people older than me and a few people younger than me that sort of are in that generation where.
Not me. No,
Have you got me back?
no, no, not me. I'm joking about the age thing.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There's that generation, I guess, where divorce became almost a little bit more popular and a little bit more mainstream, and
Yeah. Mm.
we it's a lot more prevalent that I think it's like 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's obviously not the extremes that you're talking about, but
Yeah.
I see it as a path. You choose which way you want to go based on what happened to father figures, right? Whether they used helicopter parenting, which is obviously like still being present and coming in and out, but a lot of adults, males of my generation, have gone through divorce and maybe not had a father figure, and we're seeing essentially a small collapse in our society in the form of rioting against people of similarities that want just the best for their life as well, which is
Yeah.
sort of interesting take on it.
It's sad in that, we kind of rising up against people who are different to us, but essentially, if you break it down, we're all the same. And, this is something that people aren't willing to kind of look at. And I mean, we were raised in, I mean, I'm fairly young, you know. So I was raised in like full on apartheid South Africa. It was a thing, But when I first started my MPO 13 years ago, one of the first guys I counseled was a young black guy from one of the from Soweto, one of the townships as we call them. And this guy sat down and for 2 hours he poured his heart out to me. Just like didn't know me from a bar of soap. He just needed a space where he felt safe enough to be able to talk about all the things that happened to him. And the weirdest thing is that, like, towards the end of it, I actually sort of started laughing uncontrollably. And he looked at me, he was like most offended. Of course, I mean, you just poured out your deepest pain, and this guy laughs at you. But I said to him, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at the fact that your life and my life were the same. And he goes, no ways, man, that doesn't happen to white people. And I go, like, yeah, we might have stayed in the suburbs with nicer houses and two cars and a TV and all that sort of stuff. And you grew up in the townships in small house, no car, whatever the case. But the pain that we both experienced was the same. And the net result of that pain on us as adults is the same, And I got to tell you that, like, without me even realizing, there was a subconscious shift in my head to kind of just understand that doesn't matter where you come from, what your background is, what the color of your skin is, what your religion is, or whatever the case, we all hurt the same. And if we start looking at people from that perspective, my question is always, what hurt have you been through? Why? Why have you, you turned out to be such an exemplary person in life, what is it that hurt you? What caused this kind of disconnect in your life? Because I've never met a 5-year-old that goes, when I grow up, I want to run around town and break windows and steal televisions and riot and burn buses. I've never met a 5-year-old boy that says, when I grow up, I want to beat my wife, or I want to be a rapist, or I want to be a serial killer, or I want to be, I've never met anybody like that, not a 5-year-old anyway. So I think generally we kind of have an ideal of becoming something heroic, teacher, doctor, policeman, fireman, and something breaks that. And we need to kind of figure out what that something is and fix it, or try and fix it. And that's kind of where I specialize.
Yeah, most people want to be useful to society. Well, not most
Absolutely.
5-year-olds. Yeah, they all have that dream.
Yes, yes.
So we took, like, we're talking about this sort of generation that's sort of gone through abuse in South Africa and other parts of Africa as well, and we've talked about who those abusers are. But like, what's the impact on them as adults? Is there positives, negatives? What do they stem from there?
Yeah. See, so um, I always say that men who grow up in very toxic environments or mildly, we tend to look at abuse as like one category. It's either physical or sexual. That's it. I tend to look at abuses in terms of either hard abuses, the physical or the sexual, or soft abuses, the mental, emotional, verbal, narcissistic, that sort of abuse. And we need to understand that these abuses impact on your life either way. Just because you weren't raped as a child or just because you weren't beaten by your father as a child doesn't mean that you didn't suffer trauma. And your trauma and my trauma might be different, but it is still trauma. And we need to break it down into that category. It's trauma. So your worst day in your life is your worst day. And that impacts on you mentally. My worst day was different to yours, but it was still just my worst day in life. And we need to kind of work on fixing those aspects of it. So don't look at life and go, well, I wasn't raped as a child, or I wasn't molested as a child, or I wasn't beaten as a child. Look at it going like, what was the pair of glasses or the earphones that were placed on me as a child by my parents, right? What lens do I see the world through? What earphones do I hear the world through? And how do I perceive things? And that quite often would lead to you understanding that, well, my life is a little dysfunctional here because I'm afraid of success, or I have a very low self-esteem because I grew up in a home where I wasn't heard. Or I grew up in a home where I was told that I was stupid and lazy all the time, or my teachers kept telling me I was stupid and lazy. And although it sounds quite harsh calling that trauma, but it is. It impacts your life. It changes the way that you think about yourself and the way that you see the world. And those are the things that we need to start working on. Now, the effects of that essentially are going to be, as I say, the 5 coping mechanisms that I believe men are given: that's sex, sports, silence, addiction, and aggression, right? So those are all the kind of toxic traits. So sex, of course, it could be sleeping around, not being able to be faithful to one particular relationship or person. Pornography, you know, sex with yourself seems to, for a lot of men, be better than trying to find a girlfriend. I can understand that construct sometimes. Silence is the guy who comes home from work and says, "Leave me alone, I've had a bad day," and goes into his room and sulks and just like works on his computer or is on his laptop all the time. Sports, the guy that either goes to play sports or sits watching television from Saturday morning to Sunday night just so he doesn't have to engage with his family. Addiction, people that binge drink, nobody sees that as an addiction. I have to get pissed on Friday night. I have to get pissed on Saturday night, That is an addiction, and we need to talk to that because you're avoiding. So you're great at work, but then you're avoiding time with family because you need to get slammed. So addictions also food, overeating, spending 6 hours a day in the gym, that sort of stuff. So addiction is a huge bracket that we need to look at. And then, of course, the aggression, the anger that so many men have because they're not heard, because they're being told constantly that there's something wrong with them. We need to understand that for every man, masculinity is his very core. Feminism, it's not their core. They have other things that they can deal with. Feminism is just being a nice lady, and the masculinity for us, that's our very core, that's our being. And that's been attacked constantly. So we suppress and suppress and suppress, and that unfortunately comes out in anger. And we need to learn different ways of dealing with that. We need to learn how to express those things emotionally. So without our fists, we can talk about things like that. We can get support from other men. Quite often, it's like, "Oh, don't be such a baby, grow up," or something, And it's like these typical things. And everybody goes, "No, don't say that," but we do. Come on, let's be honest, Today, you're still ridiculed for having a different sexual preference. that's not it. I've met some men who are homosexual and more masculine than a lot of people that I know. So yeah, so let's not go there. Um, so those are the negatives that come out of it. Some of the positives that come out of it, I find that a lot of the guys I help are not clinically ADHD, but they have traits of ADHD. And if you learn to harness those traits, it can be a superpower. A lot of survivors grow up to be good empaths. The problem is it's negative until you fix it, and then it becomes a positive. There's nothing. The name of my nonprofit is called MatrixMen, and everybody thinks it's the Keanu Reeves thing, dodging the bullets and all that sort of stuff. It's not that. It's not. There are three different matrix. There's the medical matrix, which would be the pericardium, the womb. Okay, so the bag around the heart that encloses the heart, the womb that encloses the baby. There's the mathematical matrix, which you see in the movie, right? All the numbers cascading down. Then there's a geological matrix. So it's that rock that you often get in these like shoe wow shops, where they sell incense and all that sort of stuff. So on the outside, this rock is really dark and looks very hard and impenetrable. But when you break it open, it's filled with amethyst or crystals and that sort of stuff. And that's, to me, typically what a man is like, this hard outer casing. But when you finally break that open, he's this beautiful gem inside. He's just an amazing person, empathetic, caring, protective, the provider, all that sort of, all the good masculine traits.
Yeah, I like that analogy. And you use the word trauma, and you say that people suffer from different trauma. Obviously, there's been stuff in the news and in the media around, I guess, latching onto words. So, like saying I have mental health problems when maybe you're just having a bad day, and sort of abusing that word. Obviously,
Yes.
that's the definition. That's the clinical definition of trauma, right? Something that happened to you that negatively impacted you.
Yes.
Where and how do you create self-awareness on that to start making a change?
Well, of course, I use my story. I believe in stories, man. It's vital that people get open and honest and start telling their stories, because that encourages other people to start dealing with their issues. For me, it was 15 years ago. I tuned into the Oprah Winfrey show, and there was Tyler Perry and 200 other men talking about the trauma that they'd suffered through as children, and made me think, and I immediately from that point onwards started doing a lot of research into male survivors and how sexual abuse impacts adult men. And I did a lot of homework, and it was a painful 6, 7 months of recovery on my own. There weren't psychologists or psychiatrists that dealt with this sort of thing in South Africa. And I essentially online just managed to muddle my way through it, learning as much as I possibly could. I think we need to be open to that, and we need to be open to talking about the things that we've been through as men, as child men, as adult men, and saying, like, how many guys are in abusive relationships right now? They just never talk about it. I know I was one of those guys. So the net effect of growing up in a traumatic household, I hear this thing often, and it's so true, right? That you will date your most dominant parent, right? And for me, that was my mother. She was a crazy narcissist. She was all about her, everything to make her look good. And I eventually married a woman who was exactly like my mother, and I was like, what the hell, and eventually you get to a point where you wake up every morning going like, I'd rather be dead. Why am I still here? So you're in a deep depression because you've been told on a constant basis that you're not good enough, that you don't measure up. And then it started getting physical. And I stayed quiet about it. I didn't say anything. It was like my secret. And I think we need to get to that point. And we're lucky these days in terms of social media and podcasts and videos and all that sort of stuff that we can talk about these things, that we can raise awareness about these things. That the next step is to create safe spaces where men can actually meet together and start talking about these things with each other, and feel safe and included and not vulnerable, or allowing themselves to be vulnerable, knowing that it's not going to move outside of this sphere. It's I can talk to these guys, and I'm safe to do so here. And we can like give experiences, not advice, just share our experiences on how we dealt with things. And hopefully you find similarity with somebody else's story and begin a healing process.
That's the one reason I started this podcast, was to share stories and see similarities. One thing that I found with my battle was that I wanted to do it on my own. I didn't really seek therapy. I didn't seek counseling. I decided I looked myself in the mirror and I'm gonna solve this situation on my own. And I always use this example. Like if a man fixes something, he may have looked on several forums, rang his dad, rang his mate, but when the wife, the girlfriend, the friend goes, "Oh, you fixed that," the answer will be yes. They did it themselves. They don't want to
Yeah.
share in the glory, but they try and find solutions elsewhere. So that's why I started this podcast. Was the more stories I can share, hopefully people can find similarities. Do you find as men though we try to fix problems? So when we go to speak, someone say I unloaded on you, your instant response would be to try and fix that problem for me.
Yeah, we do that with our wives, right? And that's why they get angry. So when you were asking the question, I was like, when I go and speak, men don't come up to me afterwards and say, "Hey, I want to fix this thing." They try to avoid it for as long as they possibly can. The problem is that I've planted the seed and I've kind of raised awareness about that, and it's going to grow in your head. And in 2-3 years' time, you're gonna be looking for me, going like, "Hey, okay, I heard you speaking 2-3 years ago, and I need to start dealing with this because it just won't go away." I'm trying to avoid it, but it's not going away. But yes, men are fixers. That's our nature, you know. So when your wife comes to you with a problem and says, "Hey, well, we instead of just listening and being supportive, we want to fix things," and that quite often angers them, you know. So I've had to learn. It's like when my wife comes and tells me about all the horrible people at work that she works with. I want to go, "Well, do it this way, do this, do this, do that." After all, I'm a life coach, I'm a speaker, I'm you know, listen to me. You know, and I've had to learn to not do that, to just be present and go, "Sorry, my love. Yes, yeah, you know, yeah. Do you want me to help you? No. Okay, fine. You know, I'll just listen." That's it. So yeah, we need to learn, I think, listening, which is a skill that I've had to develop as a life coach. Just listen, you know, say less, listen more. And we as husbands need to learn that same skill. Or as partners in any relationship, just learn to listen. Probably the most powerful skill that we can develop.
You mentioned third spaces and safe spaces for men. Can you talk about your experiences and some of the good things that have come from being in those spaces? Because I have a lot of listeners that may have never been to a space like that, and I just want to keep hounding on how good and how powerful they are.
Yeah. Yeah, very powerful. I don't know why it takes so much for men to get to that, you know, to get to that understanding. You know, for me, we kind of deal with really difficult topics, you know. And when guys finally get to the point where they open up and start talking about the issues that they suffered as children, it's powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And the nice thing about it is that in a group, so I never have a group bigger than sort of 7 people because it just doesn't give everybody enough time to talk about issues. And they'll hold each other accountable in that if somebody starts talking, somebody will look at them and go like, "Sorry, dude, you're not telling the whole truth." You know, it's like you're making light of this, or you're lying, or you know, they'll pick up pretty quickly if the person is honest and open and sharing everything. But you know what? The transformation is what's amazing for me. You know, my program is a 10-month program. We meet every second week. It's 2 hours long. And I find it like the third, fourth month, the guys will walk in, and the guys that are doing the work, and we need to understand there's a difference between just going to a group and and actually going and taking the advice and doing the work. You know? And you'll see the guys that are doing the work will come in one day and they will have like changed completely, not just the way they think, but physically, their facial features, the way they walk, their eyes will have changed completely, transformed. I mean, like night and day. And it's an amazing thing to see and experience. And the guys will walk in and I'll look at them and I go like, okay, you got it this week, right? And they go, yeah, I got it this week. And something will have happened in their life that will have completely, and I mean, it's like 180-degree change. It's incredible. It's so powerful. It really is.
I started this podcast maybe 2 years ago now, and I can look back at all of the episodes that I've recorded, and that's the one thing that I can notice is I look drained, I look weak, I look a shell in some of the earlier episodes, and I'm looking at myself right now, and I'm looking okay. I feel like I'm a lot better, a lot fuller. I can tell that there's almost a soul behind the eyes again. It's a completely different
Yes.
guy. Which, I can attest to that because I've literally got photo evidence of me being in two different places in over a 2 year period. So physically you can really see it, which is amazing. And obviously that then gets projected
Yeah,
out into the world, which then goes back to the positive role models and sort of leads into all of that side of things as well.
absolutely. It's just you can see a confident guy walking down the road and he's just like walking and he's smiling and he's just got his shoulders back. And it's a beautiful thing to see, as opposed to somebody like hunched over and defeated by life. Just, and when you get into the science of it, now this is something that I love, and it's because I'm fighting with with feminists, raging feminists sometimes, right? Uh, I always back what I say up with research. So I just go like, that's not what the evidence says. Research tells us that. Bam, 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 bam. So they keep going, but it's more women than men. And I'm going like, how do you know that? There is no research that supports it. There's lots of research. Yeah, but it's biased research because it only looks at things from the feminine perspective, not from the masculine. You're not looking at both. That's not research. That's just seeking answers where there are no answers, so anything can be made. Looking in the space, now this is the ADHD, and I start on a topic and then I go, go all around and I forget what I was trying to get to. So I always use research as a basis. Oh, that's what I was going, right. So trauma, and this is what a lot of people don't understand, right? Trauma manifests physically in your body. Now, it might have been trauma as a child, but it manifests physically as disease in your body as an adult. It really does. And there's evidence enough of this. There's something called adverse childhood experiences. It's a research project that's been ongoing for 30 years in the USA by the Center for Disease Control and the Kaiser Institute. And what they're finding is that men and women who've suffered 3 or more major traumas in their life as children have a higher propensity to cancer, to ischemic heart disease, to diabetes, to depression, anxiety, suicidality. I mean, suicidality goes up 1,000%. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's crazy. Depression, 400%. Ischemic heart disease, 260%. So it really, really impacts on your body physically. It makes you sick, right? And a lot of people don't realize this. And this, if you take, for instance, fibromyalgia, they're still trying to find a cause for fibromyalgia. I'll tell you the cause: childhood trauma. Simple as that. It has no basis in medicine. Nobody knows where it comes from. Nobody knows it flares up. Nobody knows what causes it. It's there. It's childhood trauma. It's that manifested trauma that you're holding on to, that anger, that hatred. And healing is just so incredible. And that's why you see a physical transformation, like you said, in yourself. Over 2 years, you've seen your face change. And that's because you start letting go of the anger. You start letting go and you're dealing with all of this stuff. It is beneficial to your health. It's beneficial to your mental state, to your emotional state. Come on, and I can't understand why people don't want to recover from childhood trauma, because it's just so beneficial. Let's get serious.
You want to benefit from this and you want to move forward. What are some of the steps that you can take right now? You've listened to this and you go, I want to try and find my childhood trauma. What are the steps?
Well, first thing is to admit that there's an issue in your life, right? So, if you you're struggling with low self-esteem, if you're struggling with relationships, you just can't get it to work. If you're struggling at work, people just walk all over you. You're an empath. People just abuse you and use you all the time. These are some of the signs of you struggling with addiction, and there's one simple cause for addiction, any addiction. I'm sorry. It's called childhood trauma. And if you don't want to deal with the childhood trauma, just simply stopping using the drugs is not going to change your life. You need to deal with the cause. Addiction is a medication that people use to deal, to hide a pain, to medicate a pain. And we need to look at that and start dealing with the pain, not the addiction. And this is, so many programs that just deal with the addiction. Stop using and your life will improve. Oh, crap. That doesn't happen. So we need to sit down and assess our lives and go, okay, where am I failing? What am I? One of the simplest tools to measure how you feel about yourself is to look into your own eyes in a mirror deeply and go, hey, I love you. You're amazing. And see how your body reacts to that, right? Most of the people go like, ugh, no, I don't like myself. And so that's a good measure. So start from there. If you realize that there is something wrong, well, then take the step. Find a life coach. Find somebody that you can start talking to that can help you through the process, whether it be me or any other life coach that specializes in childhood trauma. Now, there's a lot of them coming up. Or you can do the work as you and I did in the beginning, just by yourself, muddle through. I mean, there's so many resources available online these days. It's not even funny. So financially you're constrained and you can't do it, by getting a life coach. Then do the homework online. Find these guys that talk about trauma and the impacts of trauma on your life and all that sort of thing. And just start doing it. Yeah, just be bold enough to say, hey, I'm going to fix my life. Where there's a will, there's a way.
The stopping the addiction thing always reminds me of a hyper successful triathlete by the name of Lionel Sanders, who is a Canadian who runs ultra long distance triathlons. He used to be severely addicted to cocaine, and now he's one of the best, if not the best, long distance triathletes in the world. But if you ever watch any of his YouTube videos, he's constantly beating himself up. He's constantly doesn't feel that he's good enough. He doesn't feel that he's achieved what he wants to achieve in the sport. And like you saying what you're saying, I don't want to diagnose a guy over the internet, but it seems to me that there's maybe another issue that he might need to work on rather than cycling 180 miles every day.
Wow, you got to be bored. I did that. It's like people don't realize. So my life started transforming when I was 42. I'm not going to say how old I am now, but it was a long time ago. And and to think that I lived in addiction from the age of 13 to the age of 42. I mean, what a bunch of wasted years. What a wasted life. I mean, that's like standing at the urinal of life and just pissing it all away. I mean, really. It's so sad, but everybody goes through their experiences for a reason. I mean, we all have our time where we realize that things aren't right and we start dealing with it. Right? So I stopped drinking, and then, of course, you're going to replace one addiction with another. So what was my next addiction? Pornography and cycling. And it was all there because I just didn't want to be at home. I didn't want to be around my ex and my daughter. I just didn't want to be there. So firstly, my ex was incredibly abusive, verbally, mentally, emotionally. And secondly, I was so afraid subconsciously that I would hurt my daughter because of what had happened to me as a child. You're avoiding. If you're out cycling 180 miles a day or whatever you're doing, you're avoiding, Find those things that you're avoiding. Rather, I mean, if you're avoiding, if you don't want to go home at night, well, then examine why. Is it because your partner is abusive? If they are, then deal with it. Start talking to somebody. Stop avoiding and start dealing. And it's easier said than done. So the action of stopping, chucking a bottle of whiskey, gin, brandy, whatever, down my throat every night, and I was a functional alcoholic, so I didn't drink during the day. But when I got home, I would drink until I passed out, which was essentially, towards the end, was a bottle a day. The act of actually giving up the bottle was probably the easiest decision I ever made, right? that was simple. It was the fixing the mind and the trauma and all those things that caused me to drink that much. That was the difficult part. It really was. But again, that said, it was the most valuable process in my life, and I would not change it for anything. I was talking at a school, and one of the girls came up to me and she said, "If you could change your life, would you go back and change it?" And I said, "No, not really, because what happened to me throughout my life is what made me as a person today." And the truth is, for the first time in my X number of years, I actually can look in the mirror and go, "Hey, Martin, you're a nice guy and I actually love you." And that is powerful. That is really powerful.
One of the things that I try and echo is that men should be more selfish. I think a lot of the things that you talk about are holding on to ideals and trying to keep things together and almost being that fixer. One of the things that I say is men should be selfish. It's obviously a powerful word, but it doesn't
Absolutely.
mean that what in that like be horrible. It means look after yourself first, right? You
Yes. Well,
put
there's
your
a
mask.
simple there's a simple justification, Lewis, for that statement, right? Men must be selfish. And when the guys come into my program, I always say to them, for the next year, you're going to be selfish. You're going to focus on you. And they go, "Yeah, but what about my family and children?" And my question to them is, are you any good to your family and children as you are right now? And they'll stop and go, "No, actually not." Again, so be selfish for a year, and I promise you, next year when you come back, you're going to be the most amazing father. You're going to be the most amazing husband. You're going to be the most present person in that family, and it's going to be incredibly powerful. So yes, be selfish. Be selfish. Work on you. It is the most. It's not your job. That's the problem. A guy came up to me, he's like, "Yeah, woman." I'm going like, "What do you mean woman?" He says, "I've been married 5 times. And what's with these women?" And I'm going, "You know what? The common denominator here is like you. Stop blaming everybody else and fix you." Once you fix you, you'll get into a decent relationship. And guys are afraid. We're happy to blame other people. We're happy to kind of look at the world because we try to conform, right? So society tells us, you finish school, you go to university, you get a degree, right? You come out, you get a job, then you get a girlfriend, then you get engaged, then you buy a house together, then you get married, then you have children, and these things will make you happy. Well, biggest load of codswallop ever. None of that ever made me happy, ever. What made me happy was me finding myself, my purpose, my calling, my identity. That is what made me happy. And that is cascaded down into my new family, right? So I have 2 children and beautiful wife. I've mended the relationship with my daughter, my eldest daughter from my previous marriage. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren, and I have the ability to be present in those people's lives, not afraid to engage them in any way because I'm confident in who I am. And the net effect of that is that my confidence and my ability as a grandpa, as a father, and everything is making other men look at their lives and going like, there's something there, maybe I should talk to this guy. That's it, and that's how you begin mentoring your patch as well as a masculine man.
I always like to start these podcasts and end these podcasts with a difficult question. What do you think is missing in the men's space in regards to essentially what you do and mental health, well-being, and allowing for more masculinity?
Yes. Guys like you and me, simple as that. Guys that are not afraid to talk out about what happened to them. And I'm seeing, over the 13 years that I've been in the space, and I've seen a beautiful uprising of men going like, we need to be careful here because they're men who grow up and blame still. So we advocate for men, but we still blame women. And I'm going like, no, no, we need to be in a space where we unite, where we bring together the male and the female. Let's face it, without a woman, I'm kind of lost. I like him being in a relationship, right? And without them, I'm going to kind of be pretty lonely and pretty messed up, I think. It's not that I have to have somebody in my life. It's just that I'm comfortable having somebody in my life. They don't complete me. They don't make me whole. I am whole as a person. They just make life a little bit nicer, or a lot nicer. So we need to be careful in that space. So we need more men standing up and saying, hey, come on, let's transform things, let's change things, let's build and develop masculinity. We don't have to redefine masculinity. Absolute rubbish. We just need to get men to find their masculinity and to understand it and to use it properly. And men that don't cry about how they've been so hard done by, life is so horrible, the government hates us and the laws everything's against us. No, rubbish, masculine men will stand up, and together, united, we will change that. We will be a force to be reckoned with, and a healthy, positive force, not a vicious, violent, angry force. Just a bunch of great men standing together, shoulder to shoulder, saying, hey, things are going to change. We don't want to take away from the gains of feminism. We want to add to them. Let's face it, a lot of 50-year-old feminists are going like, yeah, I worked on my career all my life and now I'm as lonely as hell because no man wants me. I'm too independent. So it's kind of backfired on them. So let's not do that. That was
Amazing.
a long answer. Sorry.
That's the beauty of podcast. That's the beauty of podcasting. Martin, absolute pleasure. Loved every second of it. Could talk to you for hours. If people have loved what they've heard, where can they? That's okay. I just said it's been an absolute pleasure. I could speak to you for hours on end. It's been informative for me and a good fun as well.
Great. Yeah. Well, my encouragement to all men out there is like, find your true identity, find your true calling, and that is what gives you purpose in life. And if you want to get a hold of me, I'm available on all social media as Martin Pelders, or Martin Pelders author. If you really want to look at it and see what your life is like compared to mine, and get some examples, you can always download my book from Amazon. It's called The Pumpkin Van. Weird name. You need to read the title, read the book to find out why the title is The Pumpkin Man. But it honestly just lays out what it's like to grow up in an abusive environment as a child and how it impacts your life. I've been incredibly honest in that book, where I'm very open about my faults and my, all the bad things about me. I don't like reading it to check things out, but anyway. So yeah, they're welcome to hit me up on social media. I'm busy just developing my website, or you can look at MatrixMen.org, which is my non-profit. Hit me up through that as well.